Frost clung to the oak leaves like broken glass. I walked the northeast boundary that Thanksgiving morning, boots crunching frozen ground, placing orange survey stakes at each corner post. The diesel engine of my old Jeep ticked as it cooled behind me. 67 years on this earth, 50 of them on this land, and I could still smell wood smoke drifting from the farmhouse chimney a quarter-mile south. By dinner, my wife stood at the head of the table with a wine glass raised. 8 guests, her Florida family, people I barely knew. "To Hal," Diane said, her smile sharp as January wind, "who built an empire but can't enjoy it. Some of us won't last forever. Some are just stuck below the level they deserve." Her sister laughed. Her cousins nodded. I set my glass down, heard the chair scrape across hardwood, and walked out. Drove straight to the line shack, that old stone cabin on the property's edge, and slept in a sleeping bag that smelled like canvas in 30 winters. My phone lit up at 11:47 p.m. Maggie Chen, Diane's best friend. "We need to talk. About the trusts, not on the phone." "What trusts?" The propane heater hissed blue flame in the corner. I spread my survey map across an old wood crate, marked the corner stakes I'd placed that morning in pencil. Neat X's at each boundary. The line shack had been a hunting cabin back in the 1880s, built from fieldstone with a tin roof that sang when it rained. One room, a sleeping loft, and a wood stove I hadn't fired up yet. Cold seeped through the stone walls, but I'd rather freeze than go back to that house. My phone buzzed again. "Diner, 7 a.m. Come alone." I stared at those 3 words. Maggie had been Diane's friend since before we married. Book club, wine nights, the whole deal. Why would she warn me about trusts I didn't even know existed? Sleep came in patches. The sleeping bag smelled like mothballs in deer season. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Diane's voice. Stuck below the level they deserve. 15 years younger than me, pharmaceutical sales rep when we met, I thought I was done being alone after my first wife passed. Thought a pretty face and easy conversation could fill an empty house. Turns out, loneliness makes you stupid. Dawn came gray and cold. I drove into Cloverfield just as the streetlights blinked off, parked behind the diner where my truck wouldn't be visible from Main Street. The smell of bacon grease and coffee hit me when I pushed through the door. Maggie sat in the back booth, leather-bound calculator case beside her, 2 cups of coffee already on the table. She looked like she hadn't slept either. "Sit," she said. I slid into the booth. The vinyl was cracked, patched with duct tape. Maggie's hands shook as she opened that calculator case. Not a calculator at all, but an old accountant's ledger with entries in neat columns. She pulled out 3 sheets of paper, slid them across the formica. Bank statements, my name at the top, accounts I'd never opened. "What am I looking at?" My voice came out rougher than I meant. 3 accounts, Maggie said. Sutton Legacy Holdings, Heritage Land Trust, Sutton Estate LLC. She pointed to signatures at the bottom of each document. "That's supposed to be your signature, but it's not, is it?" I picked up the first page, held it to the light. The fluorescent bulb hummed overhead. My hands, same hands that had built Sutton Industrial Fasteners from a garage in 1982, same hands that knew every inch of fence line on 480 acres. Those hands recognized forgery when they saw it. "No," I said, that's not mine." Maggie's eyes filled. "I've been her CPA for 3 years. I reconcile her personal accounts every quarter. 6 months ago, I noticed inconsistencies. Transfers I couldn't track, property retitles I didn't process." She tapped the middle statement. "This LLC was created 18 months ago. Diane moved $140,000 from your joint savings into it. She retitled 180 acres of your land, and she forged your signature on every document." The coffee turned to acid in my stomach. Outside, a truck rumbled past, its exhaust visible in the cold air. 18 months, I repeated. Maybe longer. Maggie closed the ledger with a soft thump. "Hal, I should have said something last year. I suspected, but I told myself I was wrong, that Diane wouldn't—" Her voice cracked. "I'm telling you now, because I can't watch this anymore." The diner door opened. Cold air rushed in, bringing the smell of road salt and diesel. An old farmer I didn't recognize shuffled to the counter, ordered eggs. The waitress called him Honey, like she'd done it 1,000 times. "How long have you known?" I asked. "For certain? 2 months. I pulled records, compared signatures, traced the LLCs back to their incorporation. She hired a lawyer, Hal, last February. Victoria Cross, handles high-asset divorces." Maggie reached across the table, gripped my wrist. Her hand was cold. She filed a spousal support pre-motion last week. We're not even divorced. She's planning for it. I looked down at those bank statements, at my name forged in someone else's handwriting. Thought about Thanksgiving dinner, about Diane's smile when she raised that glass. Some of us won't last forever. She'd been counting on it. I need a lawyer, I said. I already called one. Maggie pulled out a business card, set it beside the coffee. Roy Kellerman, he's old school, handles farm estates and prenups. He's expecting your call. I pocketed the card, stood up. The booth creaked. Maggie, I said. Why now? She looked up at me, mascara smudged beneath her eyes. Because you deserve to know what you're really fighting. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds for just a moment, lighting up the frost on car windshields like diamonds. Then it was gone. I couldn't stop thinking about that toast. Drove back to the line shack with the heater barely working, hands tight on the wheel. The memory played on repeat. Diane standing at the head of my dining table, wine glass catching the light, her sister Brenda leaning in like they were sharing a joke at a funeral. What Brenda had said right after Diane sat down, I'd heard it from the kitchen doorway where I'd gone to grab more ice. Didn't think anyone noticed me standing there. At least you'll have the house, Di, Brenda's voice, loud with wine. He's not getting any younger. What is he, 70? 67, Diane said, correcting her like it mattered. Close enough. Brenda laughed, and the others joined in, cousins I'd met exactly twice. Diane's mother, who looked at me like I was a wallet with legs. Better to be the widow than the divorcee, right? No splitting assets that way. They'd laughed, all of them. And I'd stood there in my own kitchen, holding a bag of ice that burned my hands with cold, listening to my wife's family discuss my death like it was a real estate transaction. I'd set the ice down on the counter, walked past the table without a word. Nobody tried to stop me. Now, parked outside the line shack, I understood. Diane wasn't waiting for me to die. She was betting on it. Had been for 18 months, maybe longer, building her exit strategy while I paid the mortgage, the taxes, the insurance on a life she'd already written off. My phone rang. Roy Kellerman. Maggie gave me the basics, he said. No introduction. His voice sounded like gravel and cigarettes. Can you be at my office in an hour? I can. Bring every financial document you've got. Bank statements, property deeds, tax returns. And Hal, don't tell your wife you're coming. Roy's office sat above the hardware store on Main Street. Wood stairs that creaked, a door with frosted glass that read Kellerman Law in black letters. Inside smelled like old paper and coffee that had been reheated too many times. Roy looked like he'd fought in a war and won by attrition. 72, military haircut gone gray, flannel shirt under a canvas jacket, glasses that had been repaired with electrical tape. He gestured to a chair across from his desk, a massive oak thing covered in file folders and yellow legal pads. Sit. I sat, pulled out the bank statements Maggie had given me, along with the folder I'd grabbed from my filing cabinet at the main house while Diane was at her book club. Roy put on his glasses, started reading. Didn't say a word for 5 minutes. Just read, made notes on a legal pad in handwriting that looked like barbed wire. The radiator clanked in the corner, struggling against the cold. Finally, he set the papers down. She's been systematic, he said. 3 LLCs, all created before you knew they existed. Property retitled in her name through quitclaim deeds you never signed. Money moved in increments small enough you wouldn't notice. 20,000 here, 30,000 there. Classic asset stripping. Can I get it back? Some of it, if we move fast. Roy leaned back in his chair, which protested with a squeak. But here's the problem. She hired Victoria Cross last February. Victoria doesn't take cases unless there's money to fight over, which means your wife has been planning this divorce for at least 9 months. 9 months. Spring, summer, fall. She'd smiled at me over breakfast, asked about my day, slept in my bed, all while building a legal case to take everything I'd spent 50 years building. There's something else, Roy said. He pulled a document from the bottom of my folder, one I'd forgotten I had. You signed a prenuptial agreement 5 years ago, right before the wedding, and I'd forgotten. Diane had been the one who suggested it, actually. Said she wanted to prove she wasn't marrying me for money, that she loved me for me. I thought it was sweet, romantic even. That prenup says if the marriage ends due to infidelity or fraud, she gets nothing, zero, walks away with what she brought in. Roy tapped the paper. This forgery? That's fraud. Textbook. If we can prove it, she doesn't just lose the fight, she loses everything. Something cold settled in my chest. Not quite hope, more like the feeling you get when you realize you're in a fight you didn't start but might actually win. What do I need to do? First, we document everything, every account, every property line, every asset. Second, we wait for her to make a mistake. And she will, because greedy people always overreach. Roy pulled out a retainer agreement, then took a pen and crossed out the fee section, wrote contingent in its place. You pay me when we win, and Hal, we're going to win. So, I shook his hand. It felt like shaking hands with an old tree, rough, solid, rooted. Outside, sleet started to fall. I could hear it ticking against the window glass like a clock counting down. My phone buzzed. Diane. Where are you? We need to talk. I turned the phone off. 3 days later, I drove the fence line with Clem Tucker. He'd been my neighbor for 40 years, ran cattle on the property adjacent to mine, and knew land the way some men know their own children. His truck was older than both of us combined, smelled like hay and chewing tobacco, and the heater worked about as well as a politician's promise. Heard you're staying out at the line shack, Clem said. Didn't ask why. That's how country people are. They know your business but have the decency to let you tell it in your own time. For now. Diane still at the main house? Yeah. Clem nodded, spit tobacco juice into a styrofoam cup wedged in the console. We drove in silence for a while, the truck bouncing over frozen ruts, breath fogging the windows. I'd asked him to help me check the property corners, make sure the survey stakes were where I'd left them. The northeast corner sat where my land met Clem's and a section of state forest. A natural boundary, oak grove, small creek that ran dry most summers, and a survey stake I'd hammered in personally back in 1978. Orange plastic cap, iron rod driven 3 feet deep. I could find it blind. Except when we got there, it wasn't where it should have been. Hold on, I said. Clem stopped the truck. We got out, boots crunching on frozen leaves. The wind cut through my jacket like a knife through paper. I walked to where the stake should have been, found nothing. Walked in widening circles, scanning the ground. Found it 20 feet south of where it belonged. That's not right, Clem said, coming up beside me. I knelt down, pulled the stake from the ground. The iron rod came up easy, too easy. Someone had pulled the original stake and replanted this one, barely 6 inches deep. The orange cap was new, too, not weathered like mine would have been after 47 years. Someone moved it, I said. Clem crouched, studied the ground, pointed to tire tracks in the mud near the creek. Those aren't from your Jeep. Too wide. Truck, maybe. Work truck. My hands started shaking, not from the cold. When? Hard to say. Week, maybe 2. Clem stood, brushed dirt off his knees. Hal, somebody's been surveying your property. I checked the other 3 corners. Same story. Stakes moved, repositioned, replaced with new ones that looked official but sat in the wrong spots. Each one moved the boundary inward, shaving off acres here and there. Not much, 5 acres at one corner, 8 at another, but enough to matter if someone was planning to sell. By the time we finished, the sun was setting and my jaw hurt from clenching. I need to make a call, I said. Back at the line shack, I phoned Roy, told him about the stakes. Hang on, he said. I heard papers rustling. Maggie sent me Diane's personal account records this morning. Let me check something. More rustling, then a low whistle. There it is. 2 months ago, Diane hired Precision Land Surveys out of Indianapolis, paid them $4,500. For what? According to the invoice, property boundary verification and assessment preparation. She told them she needed it for insurance purposes. I sat down on the sleeping bag, which crackled under my weight. The propane heater cast blue shadows on the stone walls. She's planning to sell, I said. Moving the stakes makes the property look smaller, easier to price, harder for me to contest. That's exactly what she's doing, and if she'd succeeded, you'd have lost acres you couldn't even prove you owned, not without a costly resurvey that would have taken months. Roy paused. But she didn't succeed. You caught it. And now we have evidence of tampering. Through the small window, I could see the main house lights in the distance. Diane was probably home by now, heating up leftovers, scrolling through her phone, planning her next move. I want to drive out there tomorrow, Roy said. Get photos of those stakes, measurements, GPS coordinates. We're building a case, Hal. Every stupid thing she does makes it stronger. After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. The heater hissed, wind rattled the tin roof. I thought about the first time I'd walked this property, back in 1975. 25 years old, fresh from selling my first major contract for industrial fasteners, and I'd stood right where the line shack sat now and thought, this is it, this is home. 50 years of work, 50 years of maintenance and care, and knowing every oak tree, every fence post, every square foot of ground. And Diane thought she could steal it with forged signatures and moved stakes. I pulled out my phone, looked at the contact I hadn't called in 8 years. Danny, my son, from my first marriage. Last I heard, he was working pipeline construction in North Dakota. We'd had a falling out when I married Diane. He'd said she was after my money. I'd said he was being disrespectful, and we hadn't spoken since. My thumb hovered over the call button. Didn't press it. Not yet, but soon. The week before Christmas, I filed for a controlled burn permit with the county. 80 acres on the south section of the property, all of it choked with invasive scrub, autumn olive, bush honeysuckle, Bradford pear volunteers. I'd been meaning to do it for years, restore the native prairie that used to grow there before everything got strangled by imported species that had no business in Indiana soil. The timing wasn't accidental. I wanted to see something burn. The permit application sat on my passenger seat when my phone rang. Diane. I let it go to voicemail, listened to the message while parked outside the county extension office. Hal, I know what you're doing. Her voice was tight, controlled, the voice she used when she was performing concern. This controlled burn obsession, it's not healthy. You're talking about setting fire to 80 acres of our property. That's not normal behavior. I'm worried about your judgment. Our property. She'd never called it that before. Always your ranch or the land. Now suddenly, it was ours. I deleted the message, went inside. The extension agent was a kid, couldn't have been more than 30. He looked at my application, nodded, stapled some paperwork together. We'll need a site visit, he said. And given the acreage, we require a mental competency certification from the landowner. Just standard procedure for large burns. Liability reasons. Mental competency. Right. Just a form your doctor signs, says you understand fire safety protocols and can make informed decisions about land management. Usually takes a week to process. I signed where he indicated, left with a sinking feeling in my gut. 2 days later, Roy called. Diane filed a challenge to your burn permit. She what? Claims you're exhibiting signs of diminished capacity, says you've become obsessed with burning the property, that you're talking about it constantly, that she fears for the safety of the surrounding area. She's requesting the county deny your permit pending a full competency evaluation. I sat down hard on the line shack steps. December wind cut through my jacket, carried the smell of coming snow. That's not... I filed one permit application. That's not obsession. I know that. You know that. But the county assessor doesn't know you personally, and Diane's painted a picture of an elderly man fixated on setting fires. Roy's voice went flat. She's weaponizing bureaucracy. It's smart, actually. Forces you to prove you're competent, flips the narrative so you're defending yourself instead of attacking her fraud. Can she do that? She already did. The assessor is scheduling a home visit to evaluate your living situation and mental state. Probably next week. I looked at the line shack. 1 room, stone walls, sleeping bag on the floor, propane heater, survey maps tacked to the wall like a conspiracy theorist's apartment. It didn't exactly scream stability. Roy, I know, we'll prep for it. But Hal, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. He paused. How much time do you really have? The question hit like a hammer between the ribs. What do you mean? I mean, I've been doing this long enough to recognize urgency when I see it. The burn permit, the estate documents you keep asking about, the way you talk about legacy like you're settling accounts. Another pause. How long did the doctor give you? I closed my eyes. Saw Dr. Patel's face in the exam room last June, the way she'd folded her hands on the desk before she spoke. 18 to 24 months, I said. Prostate cancer, stage 3. Started treatment in August, but the prognosis isn't good. Silence on the line. Wind rattled through the oak branches. Does Diane know? Roy asked. No. Does anyone? Just you and my doctor. Roy let out a long breath. Okay, that changes things. That actually changes everything. How? Because if Diane's been planning this divorce since February and she doesn't know you're dying, then she thinks she's racing your age. She thinks she has years to position herself, to hide assets, to build her case. His voice picked up speed. But she doesn't have years. She has months. And the moment she finds out, And she will find out. The second we go to court or the assessor mentions it, her whole strategy falls apart, because then she's not the younger wife escaping an old man. She's the woman trying to rob a dying man's estate. My chest felt tight, not from the cancer, from the weight of it all. When's the competency evaluation? I asked. January 14th. 6 weeks. 6 weeks to prove I was sound enough to make decisions about my own land while dying of cancer I hadn't told anyone about. I need to call Danny, I said. Your son? Yeah. Hal, I'm not going to tell you your business, but if you're thinking about reconciliation, now would be the time. The assessor will ask about family support, living situation, social connections, a son who shows up, who testifies to your land knowledge and mental acuity. That carries weight. I'd been thinking about it for weeks. Every night in the line shack, staring at the ceiling, I thought about the last thing Danny said to me 8 years ago. She's using you, Dad. Can't you see that? You're going to lose everything. He'd been right. After Roy hung up, I sat there until my hands went numb from the cold. Then I pulled up Danny's number, the one I'd saved all these years, even though we never used it, and I pressed call. It rang 4 times, went to voicemail. His voice, deeper than I remembered. You've reached Danny Sutton. Leave a message. Danny, it's your old man. My voice came out rougher than I meant. I know, it's been a long time. I know I was stubborn and stupid, and you were right about Diane. You were right about all of it. I stopped, swallowed. I'm in some trouble here. Legal trouble, and, well, there's other things too. Medical things. I could use your help if you're willing. I'd understand if you're not, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry, for all of it. I hung up before I could say anything else stupid. The sun was setting behind the tree line, turning the winter sky the color of a bruise. I went inside, fired up the propane heater, and pulled out the folder Roy had given me. Estate documents, property deeds, the prenuptial agreement I'd signed 5 years ago. There was a clause I'd never noticed before. Page 7, subsection C. In the event of grantor's death within 5 years of marriage, spouse waives all claims to estate proceeds pending verification of asset distribution as outlined in section 12(12)(a). I'd signed this thing 3 months before the wedding. Diane had insisted on having her own lawyer review it, said she wanted everything to be fair. Now I understood why she'd hired Victoria Cross in February. February would have been year 4 of our marriage. 1 more year, and the 5-year clause expired. 1 more year, and she could have contested the whole prenup, claimed it was signed under duress or outdated or whatever legal fiction Victoria could manufacture. But she'd gotten impatient. Or maybe she'd heard something, noticed me losing weight or moving slower. Maybe she suspected. Either way, she'd jumped too soon. My phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Dad, it's Danny. Got your message. I'm in Bismarck. Can't just leave the job, but I'll try to call tomorrow. Are you okay? I stared at those words until they blurred. Typed back, not really, but I will be. Outside, the first snow of December started to fall, silent and cold, covering the survey stakes I'd replaced with proper iron rods driven deep into frozen ground, covering the tire tracks from Diane's hired surveyors, covering everything in white like the land was trying to forget what had happened on it. But the land doesn't forget, and neither do I. Christmas came and went at the line shack. I didn't put up decorations, didn't cook a turkey, just sat by the propane heater with a can of soup warmed on the camping stove, listening to the wind test the tin roof for weaknesses. The stone walls held cold like a root cellar. I'd brought extra blankets from the main house. Snuck in while Diane was at her book club, loaded up the truck with clothes and camping gear and things I'd need if this turned into a longer fight. Found an old cardboard box in the back of my closet, dusty, taped shut, opened it. Inside were Danny's Boy Scout patches, Eagle Scout Wilderness Survival Orienteering, the neckerchief he'd worn at his Court of Honor ceremony, red and gold, folded neat as a flag. Under that, an envelope addressed to him in my handwriting. Never sent. Written 8 years ago, after our fight about Diane, after he'd told me I was making the biggest mistake of my life, and I'd told him to mind his own business. I opened the envelope. My own words stared back at me. Son, I'm sorry. You were trying to protect me, and I was too proud to listen. Call me when you're ready. I'll be here. I'd sealed it, stamped it, driven halfway to the post office, then turned around, told myself he needed to make the first move, that I was the father, and he owed me respect. 8 years of silence, because I couldn't mail a letter. I set the Boy Scout patches on the wood crate next to my survey map, looked at them until the propane heater cycled off and the cold settled in deep. My phone showed 11:47 p.m. No calls, no messages. Outside, snow fell thick and steady, muffling the world. The day after Christmas, Pastor Bill Hendricks called, asked if I'd be willing to meet with Diane for mediation. Church basement, neutral ground, just the three of us trying to find common ground before lawyers made everything worse. She asked for this? I said. She did. Says she wants to reconcile, that things got out of hand, that she misses you. I almost laughed. Pastor, she's been stealing from me for 18 months. I know what you believe, Hal, and I'm not saying you're wrong, but I've known you both for 5 years, and I've seen good marriages fall apart over misunderstandings. Maybe this is one of those times. It's not. Then prove it. Come to mediation. If she's genuine, you'll know. If she's not, well, that'll be clear too. So I went, because Pastor Bill was a good man who'd buried my first wife and believed the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. The church basement smelled like old coffee and mildew. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flickering at intervals like Morse code. Folding chairs arranged in a circle, the kind they used for AA meetings and youth groups. Pastor Bill sat at 12 o'clock. I took 3 o'clock. Diane walked in at 7:10, dressed like she was going to a funeral. Black dress, minimal makeup, tissue already clutched in her hand. But what stopped me cold was the woman behind her, Victoria Cross, her lawyer. Hal, Diane said, voice breaking on my name. She sat across from me, dabbed at her eyes with the tissue. Thank you for coming. I know things have been hard. Why is your lawyer here? I asked. Pastor Bill looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Sutton felt she needed support. This isn't mediation, I said. This is a setup. Victoria smiled, thin and professional. She wore a suit that probably cost more than my truck, carried a leather briefcase that clicked when she set it on the chair beside her. Mr. Sutton, we're here in good faith to discuss terms that might avoid lengthy litigation. Terms, I looked at Diane. You want to mediate? Tell your lawyer to leave. Diane's tears dried up remarkably fast. I need someone here who understands the legal complexities. The legal complexity is that you forged my signature on bank documents and retitled my property without permission. That's called fraud. Victoria's smile didn't waver. Those are serious allegations. Do you have proof? I have a forensic accountant and copies of every document you filed, and a prenuptial agreement that says if you commit fraud, you walk away with nothing. The tissue in Diane's hand crumpled. This is exactly what I mean, Bill. He's become paranoid, aggressive. He needs help. He needs professional care, Victoria added smoothly. Mrs. Sutton has been researching assisted living facilities that specialize in... I stood up. The folding chair scraped against linoleum. We're done here. Hal, please, Pastor Bill started. She didn't come here to reconcile. She came here to get me on record saying something she can use in court. I looked at Diane, really looked at her. The woman I'd married 5 years ago, the one who'd said she loved me, who'd promised to stick around through sickness and health. You want me in a care facility so you can liquidate everything while I'm too doped up to fight. That's the play, isn't it? Diane's face went hard. The mask dropped for just a second, and what I saw underneath was cold calculation. You're going to lose, she said quietly. This land, the money, all of it. You're too old and too sick to stop me. Too sick. Pastor Bill's head snapped toward her. What? Diane caught herself, but it was too late. The words hung in the air between us like smoke. How did you know I was sick? I asked. She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at Victoria, who was suddenly very interested in her briefcase. I meant, you hired a private investigator, I said. Not a question, a fact sliding into place. You've been monitoring my medical appointments. Victoria stood, put a hand on Diane's arm. We're leaving. This conversation is over. They walked out. The basement door slammed. Pastor Bill sat in his folding chair looking like someone had gutted him. She's not interested in saving the marriage, he said quietly. Is she? No, Bill. She's interested in winning it. I drove back to the line shack through snow that had turned the roads white and treacherous. My hands shook on the wheel. Not from cold, from rage so pure it felt like clarity. She knew. Somehow she knew about the cancer, which meant she'd been planning her timeline around my death, positioning herself to inherit everything the moment I was gone. The line shack was dark and cold when I got back. I fired up the heater, pulled out my phone, and called Roy. She knows about the diagnosis, what I said. Roy was quiet for a long moment. Then we accelerate. No more waiting for her to make mistakes. We go on offense. How? We make her visible. File a formal challenge to every LLC, every retitled property, force her into court where everything becomes public record, and how? We tell the assessor about the cancer before she does. We control the narrative. After we hung up, I sat in the dark, looking at Danny's Boy Scout patches in the propane light. The orienteering badge showed a compass rose, north, south, east, west. Danny had earned that badge right here on this property, learning to read land the way I'd learned from my father. I picked up my phone, no missed calls, tried Danny's number again. It rang and rang, then finally, "Dad?" His voice. 8 years gone, and it still sounded like home. "Danny," I said, "I need your help." New Year's came, and Diane started her campaign on social media. I didn't have Instagram or Facebook, never saw the point, but Maggie sent me screenshots. The first one showed Diane in black and white looking at the camera with red-rimmed eyes. The caption read, "Healing from a marriage where I was controlled and silenced. Sometimes love isn't enough when someone refuses to see you as an equal. Asking for privacy during this difficult time." 300 likes. Comments from people I'd never met. "You're so brave. We see you. Get what you deserve. Queen." The second post, 2 days later, showed our farmhouse at sunset. "Home is where you're valued, not where you're tolerated. Working on rebuilding my sense of self-worth." Maggie called while I was staring at that one. "She's building a public narrative," she said, "making herself the victim before anyone hears your side. Does it matter? The evidence is the evidence. It matters if half the town believes her before you ever step into a courtroom." She was right. By mid-January, I could feel the shift when I drove into Cloverfield. The hardware store clerk who used to chat about weather suddenly went quiet. The waitress at the diner poured my coffee without meeting my eyes. At the post office, 2 women stopped talking when I walked in, then resumed in whispers after I left. The town was choosing sides. The community meeting was held at the town hall on a Thursday night. Posted on the bulletin board outside the library, "Community concern for elder welfare." No names mentioned, but everyone knew what it meant. I sat in the back row. The room smelled like floor wax and old hymnals. The town used this space for everything from budget meetings to wedding receptions. Folding chairs in rows, a podium at the front, fluorescent lights that made everyone look half dead. Diane sat in the third row with Victoria and 2 women from her book club. She'd dressed like a concerned wife. Cream sweater, no jewelry, hair pulled back, touched a tissue to her eyes every few minutes. Pastor Bill moderated, started with a prayer, then opened the floor for community members to share concerns about vulnerable neighbors. The first speaker was a woman I'd never seen before. Transplant from Indianapolis, lived in one of the new subdivisions on the edge of town. She talked about elder abuse statistics, about how isolation and control often went unnoticed. Never said my name, didn't have to. The second speaker was from Diane's book club. Described a friend, again no names, who was married to someone much older, someone who managed all the finances, who made all the decisions, who'd become increasingly paranoid and erratic. Clem Tucker stood up from the front row. "I've known Hal Sutton for 40 years, he said, his voice gravelly with age and tobacco. "Built a business from nothing, employed half this town at one point, never missed a mortgage payment or a handshake deal. 3 weeks ago, he helped me balance my checkbook because my eyes aren't what they used to be. Got it right down to the penny. If that's what incompetent looks like, I wish I was half as incompetent." Murmur of agreement from the old-timers. Uncomfortable silence from the newer residents. A man in his 30s raised his hand. "With all respect to Mr. Tucker, sometimes cognitive decline isn't obvious to friends." My grandmother seemed fine until she tried to wire her life savings to a scammer. "I'm not saying that's what's happening here, but I'm saying what's happening here," Clem interrupted. "And it's not cognitive decline. It's greed wearing a concerned face." Victoria stood. "Mr. Tucker, these personal attacks are unproductive. Truth isn't a personal attack, ma'am." The meeting dissolved into arguments after that. Sides hardened. The transplants and younger folks sided with concern for elder welfare. The old-timers defended my competency. Pastor Bill tried to restore order, failed, eventually just called for a closing prayer nobody listened to. As we filed out, I caught pieces of conversations. 67 and living in a hunting shack. My age, I'd want someone checking on me. Don't know the full story. Outside, sleet had started falling. Roy was waiting by my truck, collar turned up against the wind. That went about as well as I expected. he said. Lost some people in there. Yeah, but you held the ones who matter. And Hal, he pulled out a manila folder, handed it to me. Maggie finished the deep dive. I opened the folder. Inside was a hand-drawn map, done in colored pencil on ledger paper, the kind of work an accountant does when they're building a case they can explain to a jury. Every LLC traced back to its incorporation date, every property retitle documented, every forged signature circled in red. At the top, in Maggie's neat handwriting, asset map, Sutton estate fraud, and the LLC incorporation dates highlighted in yellow, Sutton Legacy Holdings, Estrenius March 2019, Heritage Land Trust, Estrenius April 2019, Sutton Estate LLC, Est, May 2019. We'd gotten married in August 2019. She created these companies 6 months before the wedding, I said. 6 months, yeah. Roy pointed to the timeline Maggie had drawn at the bottom. She didn't marry you and then get greedy. She incorporated the LLCs, researched estate law, and then married you. This was premeditated from the start. The sleet tapped against the truck hood like fingernails on glass. The prenup, I said, holds fraud voids everything. She doesn't get the house, the land, or a dime of support. She walks away with whatever she brought in, which according to Maggie's research was about $12,000 in savings and a leased Lexus. For the first time in months, I felt something close to hope. When's the competency hearing? January 14th, 2 weeks. And Danny? Roy smiled. He called me this morning, said he's driving in from North Dakota, should be here by the weekend. 8 years of silence, ending with a 1,200-mile drive through January snow. Maybe some things are worth fighting for after all. Danny's truck pulled up to the line shack on Saturday morning, diesel engine rumbling in the cold. I watched from the window as he climbed out. 34 now, not the kid who'd stormed out 8 years ago. Bigger through the shoulders, beard gone gray at the edges, wearing a canvas jacket with pipeline company patches on the sleeves. He stood by his truck for a minute, looking at the stone cabin, then at the main house in the distance, then at me, visible through the window. I opened the door. "Pop," he said. "Son." We stood there like two men who'd forgotten how to talk to each other. The wind pushed between us, carrying the smell of snow and diesel fuel. "Place looks the same," Danny said finally. "Hasn't changed much." "You have," he gestured at me. "You lost weight." "Cancer'll do that." His face went tight. "Maggie told me." "How bad?" "Bad enough. Year, maybe 2 if I'm lucky." Danny looked away, jaw working. "And you didn't call?" "No. Because you're stubborn. Because I was wrong about Diane, about everything you said 8 years ago." I stepped out onto the porch, felt the cold bite through my shirt. "You tried to warn me, and I told you to mind your business, so I figured you'd earned the right to stay away." "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard." "Yeah, well, I've done a lot of dumb things lately." Danny shook his head, but something in his face softened. "Show me what we're dealing with." Inside the line shack, I spread out everything. Maggie's asset map, the forged bank documents, the surveyor's report about the moved stakes, the burn permit application, Victoria Cross's letters. Danny sat on an overturned milk crate, studying each document with the methodical focus he'd inherited from me. "She really went after everything," he said after a while. "Pretty much." "And the competency hearing is when?" "Thursday, week and a half." Danny picked up the asset map, traced the LLC connections with his finger. "This is good work. Who did this?" "Maggie Chen, Diane's former best friend. Ex-best friend now." "Why'd she flip?" "Conscience, I guess. Said she couldn't watch it anymore." I poured coffee from the camping percolator, handed Danny a mug. "Roy says if you testify about my land knowledge, about the orienteering lessons I gave you, it'll help prove competency." Danny looked at me over the rim of his mug. "You kept my Boy Scout patches. Never threw out anything of yours. Even after I told you she was using you? Especially after." I sat down on the sleeping bag, felt the cold from the stone floor seep through. "You were right, Danny, about all of it, and I was too proud to admit it until she'd already taken half of what I built." "Not half," Danny said. "According to this map, she took or tried to take about 40%, and you caught her before she finished." He set down the mug. "Pop, I need to tell you something. When you called at Christmas, I almost didn't call back. I was angry, 8 years angry. Figured you made your bed, you could lie in it. Would have been fair. But then Maggie called and told me what was happening, and I realized I was being as stubborn as you, letting pride keep me from— His voice cracked. From being here when you needed me. Outside, a crow called. The sound echoed across the frozen hills. You're here now, I said. Yeah, I am. Danny stood, walked to the window, looked out at the land. I learned to read a compass out there, remember? You made me navigate from the creek to the oak grove without a map. Said if I could do that, I could find my way anywhere. You got lost 3 times. 4, but the 4th time I figured it out. He turned back to me. That's what you taught me, not just land navigation. How to keep trying even when you're turned around. The propane heater cycled on with a soft whoosh. Will you testify? I asked. Yeah, Pop, I'll testify. Sunday evening, Roy came out to the line shack with a woman I didn't know. She was maybe 40, professional clothes, carrying a briefcase that looked less expensive than Victoria Cross's, but more worn in. This is Jennifer Oakes, Roy said, forensic document examiner. She's going to testify about the forged signatures. Jennifer spread Maggie's documents on the wood crate, then pulled out samples of my real signature, DMV records, old business contracts from Sutton Industrial Fasteners, the deed from when I'd bought the property in 1975. The forgeries are actually pretty good, she said, clicking on a small flashlight to examine the signatures more closely. Whoever did them practiced, but there are tells. Pressure points are wrong. The H in Sutton has a specific hook you do naturally. It's missing in these. And the baseline slant is off by about 15 degrees. Can you prove it in court? Roy asked. I can show the differences under magnification. Whether a judge finds it convincing depends on how well we present. She looked at me. Did your wife ever see you sign important documents? Would she have had exemplars to practice from? Every mortgage payment was autopay, I said. But yeah, she'd have seen me sign checks, tax returns, 5 years of watching me write my name. Jennifer nodded. That's how they usually work. Study the signature until they can approximate it well enough to fool a bank teller or title company who isn't looking carefully. Danny leaned against the stone wall, arms crossed. What happens if the judge rules against us? Then Hal loses control of the property pending further review, Roy said. Diane becomes temporary conservator. She can sell, liquidate, move assets, and by the time we appeal, there might not be anything left to save. The weight of that settled over the room like fog. We're not going to lose, Roy said, but I need everyone to understand what's at stake. Monday morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I shaved, put on clean clothes, and drove to town. Not to hide, not to avoid Diane's narrative, but to be visible. I went to the diner, ordered breakfast at the counter where everyone could see me. Clem was there, and Pastor Bill, and 3 farmers I'd known for decades. We talked about equipment prices and whether the Colts would ever win another Super Bowl. Normal conversation, the kind that proves you're not losing your mind. The younger crowd at the back booth went quiet when I walked in. I felt their eyes on me, heard the whispers, but I didn't leave. After breakfast, I stopped at the hardware store, bought fence staples and orange survey stakes, the real kind, industrial grade, the ones that last 50 years. The clerk rang me up without comment, but I saw the question in his eyes. Why does a man who might lose his land buy fence supplies? Because the land was mine until a judge said otherwise. That's why. At the post office, I ran into one of Diane's book club friends. She looked like she wanted to turn around, but I nodded to her, polite and calm. Morning, Susan. Harold. Her voice was stiff. How's your mother doing? I heard she had hip surgery. Susan blinked, surprised. She's recovering well. Thank you for asking. Tell her I'm thinking of her. I left before she could respond. Small victories, proving I remembered people, cared about neighbors, operated like a man in full possession of his faculties. That afternoon, Danny and I walked the property line, all 480 acres, checking every boundary marker, every fence post, every corner stake. He carried a GPS unit from his pipeline work, recorded coordinates, took photos. Why are we doing this? He asked after the 3rd corner. Because on Thursday, they're going to ask me to prove I know this land, and I need to know I can do it. I pointed to an oak tree 50 yards north. See that tree? Lightning struck it in 1983, split it right down the middle, but it survived. Your mother and I used to picnic there when you were little. Danny looked at the tree, then at me. I remember. You taught me to identify oak leaves there. Said knowing trees was like knowing neighbors. Got to pay attention to the details. You remember that? I remember all of it, Pop. We finished the circuit as the sun set, turning the winter sky purple and gold. My legs ached, my chest hurt, but I knew every inch of that property like I knew my own name, and I could prove it. Tuesday night, Maggie called. Diane's scared, she said without preamble. How do you know? Because she called me. First time since I told her I was helping you. She wanted to know what I'd found, what I'd told Roy, whether I was really going to testify against her. What did you tell her? I told her the truth, that she'd committed fraud, that I had documentation, and that I'd be in court Thursday to make sure everyone knew exactly what she'd done. Maggie paused. She cried, said she never meant for it to go this far, that she just wanted security, that she loved you. Did you believe her? Not for a second. People who love you don't forge your signature on quitclaim deeds. Another pause. Hal, she's going to come at you hard on Thursday. Victoria knows the competency case is weak, so they're going to make it about your health, your living conditions, your judgment. They're going to paint you as a sick old man who's too stubborn to accept help. Let them try. Roy says you're ready. I am. After we hung up, I sat with Danny in the line shack. The propane heater glowed blue in the corner. Outside, an owl called from the oak grove. You scared? Danny asked. Terrified. Good. Means you care. He stood, stretched. I'm going to sleep in my truck. Need to be up early to review my testimony with Roy. You can take the loft. Pop, you need rest. Big day coming. He squeezed my shoulder. Get some sleep. I'll see you in the morning. After he left, I lay in the sleeping bag, staring at the stone ceiling, listening to the wind test the tin roof. Tomorrow was Wednesday. One more day until the hearing that would decide whether I kept my land or lost everything to a woman who'd been planning my downfall since before she ever said I do. I thought about my first wife, about the promises I'd made to her before she died, about Danny sleeping in his truck because he'd driven 1,200 miles to help his stubborn father, about legacy and what it meant to fight for something bigger than yourself. And I thought, whatever happens Thursday, I showed up, I fought. That's got to count for something. The owl called again, closer this time. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. The courthouse smelled like marble and old wood and decisions that couldn't be undone. I sat at the defendant's table, though I wasn't technically a defendant, just a man trying to prove he was sane enough to burn his own land, wearing my one good suit that Danny had ironed for me at the motel. Roy sat to my left, reading glasses perched on his nose, yellow legal pad covered in notes. Danny sat in the gallery behind me, close enough I could hear him breathing. Across the aisle, Diane wore navy blue, the color of trustworthiness. Victoria sat beside her, briefcase open, documents arranged in neat stacks. They looked prepared, professional, like they did this every day. Judge Whitmore entered, woman in her 60s, gray hair, reading glasses on a chain, reputation for no-nonsense rulings. We all stood. Be seated, she said. We're here regarding the petition for mental competency evaluation filed by Mrs. Diane Sutton concerning her husband Harold Sutton's application for a controlled burn permit. Mrs. Cross, you may begin. Victoria stood, smoothed her skirt. Your Honor, we're here out of genuine concern for Mr. Sutton's welfare and the safety of the community. Over the past several months, my client has witnessed alarming changes in her husband's behavior. Obsessive focus on burning 80 acres of property, isolation in a remote hunting cabin with minimal amenities, refusal to engage in reasonable discussion about his health or future planning. We believe Mr. Sutton is experiencing cognitive decline and lacks the capacity to make safe decisions regarding large-scale land management. She called her first witness, Dr. Marcus Webb, geriatric psychiatrist from Indianapolis. Never met me, but he had opinions. Based on the behavioral patterns described, Webb said, adjusting his tie, social withdrawal, fixation on a single project, resistance to family intervention, these can indicate early-stage dementia or depression-related cognitive impairment. And in your professional opinion, Victoria asked, should someone exhibiting these symptoms be permitted to conduct a controlled burn of 80 acres? I would recommend a full psychiatric evaluation before authorizing such activity. Roy stood for cross-examination. Dr. Webb, you've never met Mr. Sutton. Mr. Sutton, correct? That's correct. Never conducted an examination, never reviewed his medical records, never spoken to him or his actual physicians? I'm basing my assessment on the behavioral profile provided by his wife, who stands to inherit his estate. No further questions. Victoria called Diane next. She took the stand with tissues in hand, voice trembling. He's not himself, she said. He talks about that burn constantly. Says he needs to do it before... She caught herself, dabbed her eyes. Before it's too late. He's living in a cabin with no running water, barely eating. I'm afraid he's going to hurt himself or others. Mrs. Sutton, Victoria said gently, why do you believe your husband needs this competency evaluation? Because I love him, and I can't watch him destroy himself. Roy's cross-examination was surgical. Mrs. Sutton, when did you first consult with Attorney Cross? Diane hesitated. I'm not sure exactly. Let me refresh your memory. February 14th of last year, Valentine's Day. You retained her services 9 months before your husband filed for this burn permit. That was for estate planning. Estate planning. Roy pulled out a document. Your Honor, this is the retainer agreement between Mrs. Sutton and Attorney Cross. The stated purpose is dissolution of marriage and asset protection, not estate planning, divorce. Diane's face went pale. Roy continued. Mrs. Sutton, you created 3 LLCs in the spring of 2019, correct? Before you married Mr. Sutton? Those were for transferring marital assets into your sole control. You retitled 180 acres of your husband's property without his knowledge or consent. You forged his signature on multiple bank documents, and now you're asking this court to declare him incompetent so you can complete the theft legally. Objection. Victoria was on her feet. Counsel is testifying. Sustained, Judge Whitmore said. Mr. Kellerman, question form, please. Mrs. Sutton, did you or did you not forge your husband's signature on property documents? I may have signed his name when he was busy, but he knew. That's a yes. No further questions. Judge Whitmore looked at Roy. Call your next witness. On the petitioner calls Harold Sutton. I stood, walked to the witness stand. My legs felt steady, my mind felt clear. I'd been preparing for this moment for 2 weeks. Roy started gentle. Mr. Sutton, how long have you owned your property? 50 years. Bought it in 1975. 480 acres, bounded by state forest to the north, Tucker property to the east, County Road to the south, Dempsey Creek to the west. Can you describe the northeast corner boundary? I closed my eyes, saw it like I was standing there. Northeast corner sits at 40 degrees, 12 minutes, 18 seconds north latitude, marked by an oak grove, planted 1923, according to the county surveyor's map. Original survey stake from 1978, iron rod driven 3 feet deep, orange plastic cap, small creek runs northwest to southeast, usually dry by August. Soil's clay heavy, doesn't drain well. Not good for crops, but the oaks like it fine. The courtroom was silent. Sutton, why do you want to conduct this controlled burn? Because 80 acres of native prairie got choked out by invasive species over the last 40 years. Autumn olive, bush honeysuckle, Bradford pear. None of it belongs here. I want to restore what was there before, let the native grasses come back. Blue stem, Indian grass, coneflower. The land remembers what it's supposed to be, just needs help getting there. Roy nodded. One more question. Why are you living at the Line Shack? Because my wife has been systematically stealing my estate for 18 months, and I'd rather sleep on stone than watch her finish the job. Roy turned to Judge Whitmore. Your Honor, I'd like to call Daniel Sutton. Danny took the stand, looked at me once, then at the judge. Mr. Sutton, what's your relationship to the petitioner? He's my father. When did you last see him before last week? 8 years ago. We had a falling out when he married Mrs. Sutton. I told him she was after his money. He told me to mind my own business. And yet you drove 1,200 miles from North Dakota to be here today. Why? Danny's voice was steady. Because Maggie Chin called me, told me what was happening, and I realized my father was right about one thing. I should have minded my own business, should have been here helping him instead of nursing a grudge. Can you speak to your father's mental competency? My father taught me land navigation when I was in Boy Scouts, made me learn every boundary, every tree, every natural landmark on that property. He could draw you a map from memory accurate enough to pass a surveyor's inspection. Last week, we walked all 480 acres. He knew every corner stake, every fence post, every place where the ground shifts from clay to sand. His body's failing him, but his mind? Danny looked at me. Sharp as it's ever been. Roy called Maggie next. She presented the asset map, hand-drawn in colored pencil tracing every fraudulent transaction. Then Jennifer Oakes, the forensic examiner, who showed the court magnified images of forged signatures next to my real ones, pointing out the differences in pressure and stroke. Finally, Roy stood. Your Honor, Mr. Sutton isn't incompetent, he's dying. Stage 3 prostate cancer, 18 to 24 months. He wants to restore his land before he's gone, and his wife wants to stop him because it interferes with her timeline for liquidating his assets. Roy placed a document on the judge's bench. This is the prenuptial agreement they signed before marriage. Section 7, subsection C states that in the event of fraud, Mrs. Sutton forfeits all claims to the estate. The forgeries we've documented today constitute fraud, which means this competency hearing is nothing more than a last-ditch attempt to delay the inevitable. Judge Whitmore removed her glasses. I'll take a 15-minute recess to review these documents. Those 15 minutes felt like hours. Judge Whitmore returned, face unreadable. We all stood until she sat, then followed suit. The courtroom was packed now. Word had spread through Cloverfield, and half the town had shown up to watch the verdict. I've reviewed the evidence presented, Judge Whitmore said. The forensic analysis of signatures, the timeline of LLC formations, the medical documentation, and the testimony from both parties. She looked at Diane. Mrs. Sutton, I find your petition for competency evaluation to be without merit. Mr. Sutton has demonstrated comprehensive knowledge of his property, clear reasoning for his burn permit application, and no signs of cognitive impairment. Furthermore, the evidence of forged signatures and fraudulent property transfers is compelling and deeply concerning. Diane's hand went to her mouth. The controlled burn permit is granted, pending routine safety inspection by the county fire marshal. Additionally, I'm ordering a forensic audit of all property transactions between Mr. and Mrs. Sutton over the past 5 years. Mrs. Sutton, you should consult with your attorney regarding potential criminal charges for fraud and forgery. Judge Whitmore's gavel came down. This hearing is adjourned. The courtroom erupted. Not in cheers, people here were too reserved for that, but in a rustle of movement, whispered conversations, the sound of long-held breath being released. Diane stood, face white, and walked out without looking at me. Victoria followed, briefcase snapping shut like a trap that had failed to spring. Roy shook my hand. That's it. You won. Danny pulled me into a hug that smelled like diesel and North Dakota winter. Proud of you, Pop. Clem appeared from the gallery, grinning. Hell of a show, Hal. Maggie waited by the door, her leather ledger case under her arm. When I reached her, she didn't say anything, just nodded, eyes wet. Thank you, I said. You deserve the truth. 2 days later, I stood at the main house door. Diane's car was parked out front, trunk open, suitcases visible. Roy had offered to supervise the move, make sure she didn't take anything that wasn't hers, but I'd told him I'd handle it. She came out carrying a box of books, stopped when she saw me. Come to gloat? Her voice was flat, empty of the performance she'd worn in court. No. I pulled an envelope from my jacket, held it out. $5,000, cash. Get a lawyer. Not Victoria, someone who'll help you with the fraud charges. She stared at the envelope like it might bite her. Why would you do that? Because I spent 50 years building things. I'm not about to spend my last year tearing people down, even if they deserve it. I set the envelope on the porch railing. I won't press civil charges. Just go, start over somewhere else. Be someone different. Diane picked up the envelope, looked at me with something I couldn't quite read. Regret, maybe. Or just exhaustion. You'll regret this, she said, but there was no conviction in it. No, I said, I won't. She loaded the last box, got in her car, and drove away, didn't look back. March came, with mud and rain, and the smell of earth waking up. Danny and I stood at the edge of the 80 acres, drip torches in hand, waiting for the fire marshal to give the signal. The county had approved everything. Fire breaks cut, weather conditions perfect, volunteer fire department on standby. You ready? Danny asked. Yeah. We started at the south edge, walking slow, letting the fire trail behind us. The invasive scrub caught fast, autumn olive and honeysuckle burning hot, smoke rising straight up in the still air. The smell was clean, like starting over. By afternoon, the burn was complete. 80 acres of black ash and smoke, but underneath, if you looked close, you could see green shoots already pushing through, native grasses that had been buried for decades, waiting for their chance. Danny stood beside me, ash on his jacket. Why does this matter so much? I watched the smoke drift toward the oak grove. toward the line shack, toward land that had been mine for 50 years and would be his soon enough. Because after I'm gone, I said, this ground will remember what it was meant to be, and so will you. A meadowlark called from the fence line. Spring rain started to fall, gentle, washing the ash into soil that would bloom purple and gold come summer. Danny put his hand on my shoulder. I'll take care of it, Pop, I promise. We stood there until the rain soaked through our jackets, watching new grass grow in the spaces where the old lies had burned away. 6 months later, I'm sitting on the line shack porch in late summer heat, watching Danny repair fence line in the distance. His truck is parked by the barn now. He moved back permanent last month, took a job with the county road crew so he could stay close. The estate documents are signed. Danny's the executor. The land's held in conservation trust. Can't be sold for 3 generations. My lawyer jokes that I'm controlling things from beyond the grave, but that's not it. I'm just making sure the right people inherit the fight. I learned something in those cold months between Thanksgiving and spring. Legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's what you protect while you're still here. Diane wanted the land, but she never understood it. You can't steal dirt, you can only prove you never deserved to stand on it. The prairie restoration is taking hold. Where we burned in March, there's purple coneflower now, black-eyed Susan, native grasses that grow waist-high and whisper when the wind comes through. The invasive species tried to come back, but Danny spent May and June pulling them by hand, same way I taught him 30 years ago. Some battles aren't about winning, they're about making sure the ground remembers what it was supposed to be. My hands shake more now. The cancer's doing what cancer does. But last week I walked the northeast boundary one more time, checked those survey stakes, the real ones, driven deep, and every single one was exactly where it belonged. The land doesn't care who owned it, it only cares who loved it. Danny's walking back now, work gloves hooked in his belt, same way I used to carry mine. He sees me watching, raises a hand. I raise mine back. I've got maybe a year left, but the ground's got forever. That's enough.